You check your phone in the morning, and suddenly it's noon. You promise yourself you'll work out today, but end up scrolling through videos instead. You start a project with fire in your eyes, and 3 days later, you can't even remember why you cared. Here's the brutal truth nobody wants to hear. Your brain isn't broken, you're not lazy, and you don't lack willpower. You're caught in something neuroscientists call the dopamine trap, and right now, it's controlling almost every decision you make. What you're about to discover in the next 15 minutes will fundamentally change how you understand motivation, focus, and why sticking to anything meaningful feels like pushing a boulder uphill. Before we dive deep into how your brain is being hijacked and, more importantly, how to take back control, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this channel is dedicated to giving you neuroscience-backed strategies that actually work. And if this video helps you understand what's really happening inside your skull, leave a like so more people can break free from the same cycle. Let's get something straight right from the start. Dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical. That's the biggest misconception floating around, and it's causing people to misunderstand their own brains. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical, the seeking chemical, the I want that signal that gets you moving toward rewards. It's what makes you reach for your phone, click on another video, or start scrolling when you said you'd only look for a minute. When dopamine surges, you feel motivated and driven. When it drops, everything feels flat and pointless. You're not depressed, you're in a dopamine deficit, and modern life has engineered this deficit into your daily existence. Think about waiting for an important text message. You keep checking your phone every few minutes, even though you know you'll hear it buzz. That's dopamine driving the anticipation, the seeking behavior. The actual message might be disappointing, but the hunt for it, that's what lights up your reward circuits. Now imagine that same mechanism being triggered 100, 200 times a day by apps designed by teams of neuroscientists whose entire job is to keep you seeking. Every notification, every pull to refresh, every autoplay video is a dopamine trigger, and your baseline is dropping lower as your brain adapts to constant stimulation. Here's where it gets really messy. Your brain operates on something called opponent process theory. When you experience something that spikes dopamine high, your brain automatically creates an equal and opposite response to bring you back to baseline. The higher the spike, the lower the crash. This is why after binging a show you feel empty. This is why after hours of social media you feel restless and irritable. This is why artificial sources of dopamine make natural sources like exercise, reading, or meaningful work feel boring and unrewarding. You've raised the bar so high that normal life can't compete. The real kicker is that motivation isn't something you find or wait for. Motivation is a neurochemical state created by adequate dopamine in specific brain circuits. When your baseline dopamine is chronically low because you're constantly chasing artificial peaks, you literally cannot generate the motivation needed for difficult tasks. You're not choosing to procrastinate. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for long-term planning and willpower, is being outbid by the parts of your brain screaming for another quick hit. The ancient reward circuits in your limbic system are faster, stronger, and louder than your rational mind. Social media platforms, video games, and endless content streams have created supernormal stimuli. These are artificially enhanced versions of things your brain evolved to find rewarding. Your ancestors got dopamine hits from finding food, connecting with others, and discovering new territory. Those were hard to get and spaced out over time. Now you get a more intense version of those same rewards delivered in a fraction of a second, over and over, with algorithms learning exactly what keeps you hooked. Your brain wasn't designed for this. It's like giving your taste buds, which evolved to like the occasional sweet fruit, unlimited access to pure sugar. The system breaks. Jim Quick, one of the world's leading brain performance coaches, talks about something he calls digital dementia. Studies show that our cognitive abilities, attention spans, and memory formation are declining because we've outsourced these functions to devices while simultaneously overstimulating our reward systems. When your brain is constantly bathed in artificial dopamine, it downregulates dopamine receptors. Fewer receptors mean you need more stimulation to feel the same level of interest or drive. It's the exact same mechanism behind drug tolerance. You're building tolerance to your own life. But here's the part that changes everything. This process is reversible. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, works in both directions. Just as you can train your brain to need more stimulation, you can train it to find reward in simpler, more meaningful activities. The fix isn't complicated, but it requires you to do something uncomfortable. You need to lower your dopamine baseline back to normal, and that means intentionally creating periods of dopamine fasting. A dopamine fast isn't about avoiding all pleasure or sitting in silence like a monk. It's about strategically reducing high dopamine activities so your brain can resensitize to normal levels of stimulation. Think of it like resetting your taste buds after eating too much junk food. The first few days of eating clean taste bland because your palate is adjusted to hyper-processed flavors. Give it a week and suddenly fresh food tastes amazing again. Same principle applies to your reward system. Start with the biggest offenders. Social media, random internet browsing, video games, binge-watching shows. These are the junk food of the dopamine world. You don't have to eliminate them forever, but you need to dramatically reduce them for a minimum of 2 weeks to see real change. During that reset period, your brain will protest. You'll feel bored, restless, anxious, maybe even irritable. That's withdrawal, and it's proof the system was dysregulated. Push through it. On the other side of that discomfort is a brain that can actually generate motivation for things that matter. Replace high dopamine behaviors with moderate dopamine activities. Go for walks without your phone. Read physical books. Have face-to-face conversations. Exercise without watching shows. Cook real food. Create something with your hands. These activities still generate dopamine, but in a healthy, sustainable way that builds your baseline up rather than creating peaks and crashes. You'll notice something fascinating after a week or two. The things you used to need superhuman willpower to start will suddenly feel easier. That's not because you became more disciplined. It's because your brain can finally generate adequate motivation for normal activities. Researchers at Cambridge University studied 2 groups of people trying to build an exercise habit. One group was allowed to use their phones during workouts. The other group had to exercise without any digital stimulation. The second group had better long-term adherence and reported higher satisfaction. Why? Because they weren't competing with artificial dopamine sources. Their brains learned to find the workout itself rewarding. The first group needed external stimulation to tolerate the activity, which meant they never built intrinsic motivation. When life got busy, the habit collapsed. This brings us to dopamine stacking. Once your baseline is healthy, you can strategically use high dopamine activities as rewards after completing low dopamine but important tasks. Your brain learns to associate the difficult task with the upcoming reward, and over time, it begins to release dopamine in anticipation of the task itself. You're literally rewiring your motivation circuits. But this only works if you've reset your baseline first. If you try dopamine stacking while you're still in chronic deficit, you'll just skip the hard task and go straight to the reward. Understanding your dopamine peaks throughout the day is powerful. Your baseline dopamine follows a circadian rhythm. It's naturally higher in the morning for most people and gradually declines throughout the day. This is why hard cognitive work is easier earlier and why your willpower crumbles by evening. Instead of fighting this pattern, work with it. Schedule your most difficult tasks when your dopamine baseline is naturally elevated. Save easier work for later when your neurochemical state makes resistance harder. This isn't about time management. It's about managing your neurochemistry. Sleep plays a massive role in dopamine regulation that most people completely ignore. During deep sleep, your brain clears metabolic waste, including the byproducts of neurotransmitter production. When you're sleep-deprived, dopamine receptor sensitivity decreases and your brain overproduces dopamine to keep you alert. This creates artificial spikes followed by crashes, further dysregulating your system. Prioritizing 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep isn't just about feeling rested. It's about maintaining healthy dopamine dynamics. There's a reason everything feels impossible when you're tired. Your reward system is offline. Physical movement has an immediate effect on dopamine levels. Exercise increases both dopamine production and receptor sensitivity. It's one of the few activities that raises baseline dopamine without creating a compensatory crash. But if you can't motivate yourself to exercise because your dopamine is too low, you're stuck in a vicious cycle. Lower the barrier to entry until it's almost absurdly easy. Don't commit to an hour workout. Commit to 5 minutes. Don't commit to the gym. Commit to walking around your block. The goal isn't the workout. The goal is hijacking the dopamine boost that comes from starting. Once you're moving, the neurochemistry changes and continuation becomes easier. Novelty is another dopamine trigger you can use intentionally. Your brain releases dopamine when it encounters something new because novelty signals potential reward opportunities. This is why traveling feels energizing. This is why starting a new project feels exciting before it gets hard. You can hack this by introducing small novel elements into routine tasks. Change your environment, use different tools, approach the problem from a different angle. These small variations trigger enough novelty-driven dopamine to lubricate the motivation machinery. Cold exposure is gaining attention for its powerful effect on dopamine. Studies show that cold water immersion increases dopamine by up to 250%, and unlike other spikes, this elevation lasts for hours without a crash. A cold shower or ice bath in the morning can give you a natural, sustained dopamine boost that makes difficult tasks easier for the rest of the day. You're essentially front-loading your neurochemical state for success. Gratitude practices have a measurable impact on dopamine regulation. When you consciously reflect on positive experiences, your brain releases dopamine in response to the memory. Doing this regularly teaches your brain to find reward in reflection rather than constantly needing new stimuli. 5 minutes of genuine gratitude journaling per day can shift your baseline over time. It sounds too simple to work, but the neuroscience backs it up. Social connection is one of the most powerful and most overlooked dopamine regulators. Your brain is wired to find deep reward in real human connection. But digital connection triggers dopamine through novelty and intermittent reinforcement without satisfying the deeper need for face-to-face interaction. You can scroll through hundreds of interactions and still feel lonely because you're getting the dopamine hit without the actual connection. Prioritizing in-person time with people you care about repairs this disconnect. Your brain knows the difference. Delayed gratification is fundamentally about dopamine management. The famous marshmallow test that supposedly measured willpower in children was actually measuring their ability to resist an immediate dopamine spike in favor of a larger future reward. But that ability isn't fixed. It's a skill trained by repeatedly practicing the pause between impulse and action. Every time you feel the urge to check your phone and you pause for even 30 seconds, you're strengthening the neural pathways that allow you to delay gratification. You're literally building the brain circuitry that makes discipline feel less difficult. The cumulative effect of chronic dopamine dysregulation shows up as anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from things that used to bring joy. If you've noticed that hobbies feel boring, achievements feel empty, or nothing seems to excite you anymore, you're experiencing dopamine receptor downregulation. The good news is that receptors upregulate when you remove excessive stimulation. The bad news is that upregulation takes time, usually several weeks to a few months. This is why quick fixes don't work. You're dealing with a neurochemical rebalancing that happens on a biological timeline. Dr. Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist at Stanford, describes dopamine as the currency of motivation. Just like financial currency, you can spend it recklessly on cheap thrills or invest it in things that compound over time. Every choice either depletes or builds your dopamine economy. Binging content is spending. Learning a difficult skill is investing. Scrolling is spending. Building meaningful relationships is investing. The compound interest on invested dopamine is a life that feels genuinely rewarding without needing constant artificial stimulation. Here's the culminating insight that brings everything into focus. You cannot think your way into motivation. Motivation emerges from the right neurochemical state, and that state is built through behavior, not willpower. Every behavioral change you make ripples through your dopamine system, either reinforcing dysfunction or building health. The reason most advice about motivation fails is because it treats motivation as the starting point when it's actually the result. You don't find motivation and then take action. You take action in strategic ways that create the neurochemical conditions where motivation can exist. The trap isn't that dopamine exists or that rewards feel good. The trap is living in an environment engineered to provide infinite artificial rewards that dysregulate your natural ability to find meaning and motivation in real life. You can't eliminate dopamine, nor would you want to. Without it, you'd have no drive, no curiosity, no joy. But you can choose whether you're going to be a passive victim of dopamine manipulation or an active architect of your reward system. That choice determines whether you spend your life chasing empty stimulation or building something that actually matters to you. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and leave a like if this made you see motivation in a completely different light. Your brain is the most complex machine in the known universe, and understanding how it actually works is the difference between feeling helpless and feeling empowered. The question isn't whether you're in the dopamine trap. If you're a modern human with a smartphone, you are. The question is whether you're ready to do the uncomfortable work of climbing out. Because on the other side of that discomfort is a version of you that doesn't need constant stimulation to feel alive, who can commit to difficult things without self-sabotage, who finds genuine satisfaction in the process rather than just chasing outcomes. That version of you is possible, but it requires you to stop blaming yourself for lacking discipline and start addressing the actual problem, a reward system that's been systematically hijacked. Take back your brain, and you take back your life.